Hello everyone, the time has finally come for us to discuss the season 2 finale of His Dark Materials, Æsahættr. For me, this episode was really a mixed bag. I'm gonna go ahead and give it a B. I don't think that anything big was necessarily missing from the episode, but I think the way things happened in the episode made it less impactful than those particular situations or character losses could have been. I was really looking for a lot of emotional devastation. I remember so clearly reading about Lee's death when I was a kid and just being completely heartbroken that he had died. I also remember feeling really confused and very upset about the way that Joffrey, John Perry, Stanislaus Grumman is finally killed, and I was intrigued and mystified and feeling just as bewildered as Will was when it happened, and I didn't really get any of that from this episode. With that said, there were some things that I liked. I know that this season was cut short because of COVID. There was supposed to be an 8th episode about Lord Asriel, so that cameo of Asriel at the end recruiting the angels was a scene that I really appreciated. I thought it was really well done given the very limiting circumstances. And I also really loved that final scene of Mrs. Coulter with her steamer trunk, opening that trunk, seeing Lyra and Pan completely drugged and asleep. Just a great reminder that Mrs. Coulter is really deluded. She's dangerous. She may have somewhat decent intentions, but the way that she manifests her love for Lyra is very complicated and troubled and problematic. Another scene I really liked was a very short moment between Lyra and Pan. They have a conversation about how when Lyra changes, Pan will stop changing. I thought that kind of introspection from Lyra was really interesting and really important, and I wish we'd been able to see a bit more of that. Before I dive into the particulars of the episode, I did want to note that I had the last week away from school and work, so I had some time to really dig into the world of His Dark Materials and the Book of Dust, and I ended up reading La Belle Sauvage. I bring this up because in my last video I was kind of wondering about Mrs. Coulter's golden monkey demon, and I found a passage in La Belle Sauvage that I had completely forgotten about. It's a scene between Malcolm Polstead, who's the protagonist of that book, and Mrs. Coulter, and he's meeting her for the first time. Malcolm notes to himself that the golden monkey demon doesn't have a name, but if he did, that name would be Malice. That was a mystery that was solved in some way, and let's get to the actual meat of this episode. This episode starts with Lyra, Will, and the witches in a cave. The witch who was attacked by a specter in the previous episode has miraculously recovered, and the idea is presented that maybe the witches are not actually very safe with Lyra and Will because of the specters. Lyra tells Serafina that maybe they should go off on their own, and this kind of sets the stage for this ongoing theme. Serafina is determined to stay with Lyra and Will though, and that is what she reiterates to Lyra. Ruta Skadi is in a place that looks extremely different from everywhere else we've seen. It almost looks like a hellscape, and she is busy overhearing a conversation between some cliff ghasts. She hears the cliff ghast talking about the scent of war in the air, and they talk about the war they know that Lord Asriel is waging against the authority. He is mustering a mighty, mighty army, but he doesn't have the one thing that he needs to overthrow the authority, and that tool is called Æsahættr. It is, of course, the subtle knife. It is one of the subtle knife's many names. I also loved our view of the cliff ghast. We had a tiny preview of them last season, but they kind of look like really ugly monkeys. Will and Pan have a really sweet and interesting conversation. Will is expressing not only his doubt in himself, but also some fear that he has. And Pan tells him that Lyra really thinks that Will is the bravest guy around. He compares Will to Yorick Bernison, the king of the armored bears, and that really seems to lift Will's spirits. Will tells Pan that he thinks that Lyra is possibly even braver than he is. Pan also tells Will that Lyra really considers him her best friend, and Will feels the same way. This is definitely a moment of closeness between Pan and Will, and by proxy, Lyra and Will as well. Lyra has been overhearing this entire conversation. She's not really asleep, so this is kind of one of those things that pulls them closer, though it is very uncomfortable, very vulnerable. Joffrey and Lee Scoresby have survived their hot air balloon crashing, and they emerge pretty unhurt in the forest. Joffrey does some of his shaman stuff and determines where the knife bearer is, and he very confidently says, "I know the way." This is kind of a bittersweet moment for Lee. He realizes that his balloon is wrecked beyond repair. He tells Hester, "I am an aeronaut no more." Lee's identity is really as an aeronaut, so this is a big change for him. He's really made such a sacrifice for Lyra getting Joffrey to this point. Still in Cittàgazze proper, Mrs. Coulter and her golden monkey are walking the streets when the golden monkey somehow sniffs out the apartment where Lyra and Will had been living. He climbs up that familiar staircase and ends up finding Lyra's coat, her anorak that she had been wearing in the north and left there. And Mrs. Coulter, following the golden monkey, sees this coat and smells it. And for me, that was an instant moment of sentimentality that I think I hadn't really seen in Mrs. Coulter before. But it was also a reminder of Ma Costa doing the same thing when the Egyptians recovered Billy Costa's sweater after he'd been kidnapped. That was an interesting parallel since, of course, Mrs. Coulter was behind the kidnapping of Billy Costa and then Billy died. We see that Mary Malone, Angelica, and Paula have reached the hills where the adults of Cittàgazze have taken refuge. Mary leaves them there, sends them on their way. They're very grateful to her. And then she follows what seems like a trail of blue flower petals up the mountain that the I Ching has instructed her to visit. And from then on, every time we see Mary, she's either consulting the I Ching again or she's looking at these flowers. She's not an important part of this episode, and to be honest, I don't think we needed any of these scenes with her. One of Serafina Pekkala's witch sisters has been dispatched to find the adult that is wandering Cittàgazze. They've come to warn her in case she doesn't know about the specters. Little do they know that that adult wandering around is Mrs. Coulter herself. So when this witch finally finds Mrs. Coulter, it is not a moment of friendship or help. It is Mrs. Coulter attacking her. She realizes that there is a witch. This is an opportunity to learn more about the witch prophecy about Lyra. So she sicks the golden monkey demon onto this witch's demon, who's of course a bird, and tries to hustle the witch for more information. The witch really tries to put up a fight, but Mrs. Coulter has specters on her side, and we see one of the specters approach the golden monkey who's wrestling with this bird demon. Though she really tries so hard not to cave, the witch finally tells Mrs. Coulter that the name that they have for Lyra is Eve. Mrs. Coulter knows that this is incredibly important. She realizes that Lyra is Eve before the fall. She hasn't come into puberty, she hasn't matured in that way yet, but this is an opportunity for her to take matters into her own hands and prevent that fall from happening. The specter is getting increasingly closer to the golden monkey demon, and the golden monkey demon is crawling out of his skin. He finally holds the bird up as if it's a sacrifice to the specter, and the specter envelops the bird, and we see the spark in the witch's eye just fade, and the witch and her demon are ostensibly dead. The specter doesn't necessarily leave the golden monkey though, and the golden monkey is very panicked. He looks up to Mrs. Coulter asking for help, realizing that she's not calling off the specter, and Mrs. Coulter has a moment of, it looks like uncertainty of whether she might want to sacrifice her own demon, but at what feels like the last moment possible, she kind of dismisses the specter and she tells her golden monkey to stop whimpering. He's just not safe with her. Lyra really seems like she's going through a lot in this episode. We see her talking to Pan. Pan is very sure that she should not leave Serafina. She and Will should stay with the witches under their protection, and he points out that they've relied on the witches to get them out of scrapes twice now, but Lyra doesn't want to risk Serafina's safety. She also doesn't want to let Will down, so she's feeling very compromised. The Magisterium soldiers who are pursuing Joffrey and Lee have somehow multiplied. There are at least 30, maybe 50 soldiers who are in hot pursuit. Rutiscati reunites with Serafina Pekkala and tells Serafina everything she's learned from Lord Asriel, and that specifically Lord Asriel is starting this war against the authority. For those of you who haven't necessarily read the books, the authority in Philip Pullman's world is God. So this is a pretty bold claim. Here's this very human man going after something that is divine, that is the creator, that is everything we think of when we think of God. Ruta also tells Serafina that because this is such a big undertaking, they really need to unite every single witch clan and bring the witches to Asriel's side. Serafina has told Ruta that she is not going to leave Lyra. Serafina says that the witch prophecy is clear. Lyra is destined to bring about the end of destiny and to return free will. Ruta seems to accept this, but she does mention to Serafina that she's heard about Æsahættr from the Cliffgas, and her next task is to find Æsahættr so that they can bring that to Asriel. In Cittàgazze proper, Mrs. Coulter and her golden monkey demon are walking through the Tower of the Angels, and Mrs. Coulter is, for reasons that are not clear, having it out with the golden monkey. She says, "You're either with me or you're against me. If you're against Lyra, you're against me." And she kicks the golden monkey. He's not doing anything to her, though he must be having thoughts that she doesn't agree with. She asks the golden monkey demon what he's so frightened of as he cowers in front of her. It is very clear that he is frightened of her, though whether he's also frightened of Lyra, we don't really know. We did see Pan basically kick the shit out of him just a few episodes ago, so I can understand why he's not necessarily eager to reunite with Lyra and Pan. As the golden monkey demon is cowering in front of her, Mrs. Coulter actually gets on all fours, so she's mirroring his body language, and she kind of beckons him a little bit closer to her. It looks like she might hit him, but instead she opens her hand and he nuzzles his head in her hand, and they have a very rare moment of peace and tranquility between them. It almost seems like she's offering him some kind of affection, and we see just how starved he is for that. Mrs. Coulter softens and she says, "We'll definitely keep Lyra safe." Maybe this maternal instinct she is feeling towards Lyra will also extend to her own demon. The Magisterium soldiers have finally caught up with Joffrey and Lee Scoresby, and Lee's foot is shot while he is trying to scramble to safety. He realizes that he is not going to be as mobile as Joffrey. After they both reach a safe spot for just a second, Lee breaks it down to Joffrey and says, "I've done the calculations. Only one of us is getting out of here alive, and I am the better shot, so you have to go." Joffrey argues with this for about a second, realizes that Lee is definitely right, and Joffrey has this important task to do. Right before he actually leaves, Lee asks him to remember his promise that he's made. Joffrey has promised to make sure that the knife bearer is going to look after Lyra as well, that will be part of his task. And we see Joffrey agree to this. He says, "Don't worry, I've remembered it, not gonna forget it," and he leaves. And this is really the beginning of the end for Lee. Lee, with the exception of Hester, is now completely on his own. He's got both his pistol and his rifle, and he is shooting to kill. He and Hester joke about that time that they were kids and used to play the Alamo, taking turns of being either the French side or the Danish side. Lee is getting progressively shot at and also progressively wounded. He takes a very bad shot to the left shoulder. He gets a bullet that scrapes along his scalp, and it's just not going well. He's doing the best that he can, but he's only one man and he can't hold out forever. When things are looking like they're nearing the end, Hester suggests to Lee that he get out that piece of cloud pine that Serafina had given to him to summon her, and he takes out the cloud pine and asks Serafina for help. We see at that moment in another part of that world where Serafina, Lyra, and Will are that Serafina immediately responds to this. It's a visceral kind of summonings, and she knows that Lee is in trouble. She needs to go help him. And Lyra says, "If Lee needs help, you need to go right now." Serafina flies off to dash to him. Unfortunately, there's no chance that Serafina will get there in time, and we watch as Lee and Hester actually die. Lee and Hester have a last conversation about whether this was Hester's fault, whether she pushed him too hard, and it's really a moment of bonding between the two of them. They know that they've died for Lyra. They've really tried to do the best they can for her. This was definitely an emotional moment, but I've got to say, it was not as emotional as I was looking for. I remember being very young, reading The Subtle Knife as soon as it came out for the first time, and being completely heartbroken when Lee dies. I actually got out The Subtle Knife to reread that passage so I could figure out what was missing for me, and I think it comes down to casting, to be honest. I don't think Lin-Manuel Miranda is old enough to play Lee Scoresby. He is too jolly. He's too much of a theater kid. And I think what made Lee Scoresby for me was how salty he was. He's really seen a lot of things. He's a very quiet, taciturn kind of guy. That expression of emotion that he has with Hester at the end makes it so much sadder. In the book, it says that Hester, for one of the only times in her life, cuddled up against Lee. She pushed her face into his, and that was such a rare thing of beauty for the both of them. And to me, that was what made it so emotionally impactful. And we don't get that with Lin-Manuel Miranda. Now that Serafina has flown off to attend to Lee, the kids and their witch guardian are taking a nap, it looks like, and Will is having one of those fever dreams about his dad. And his dad in his dream is summoning him, saying, "Get up and come find me." Will does exactly that. He leaves Lyra and the witch sleeping and stumbles off to go look for his dad on his own. And then we get the moment we've all been waiting for. Will has been walking around and he finally is approached by a figure. Will is pretty scared by this. He says, "Don't come near me," and he holds out his knife, not knowing who this person is. Joffrey walks towards Will, and Will pretty much immediately recognizes that this is in fact his father. He says, "Dad," and Joffrey understands that this knife bearer who he's been looking for is his own son. The two of them reunite, and it's pretty friendly right off the bat. This was extremely different from the book. If you haven't read the book, I'm going to tell you all about it right now. In the book, it is either nighttime or there's some kind of trick of the eye that Joffrey has summoned with his shaman skills, but there's darkness between them, and the two of them actually fight each other. They wrestle for quite a while, and it's only when they're both extremely exhausted after the physical exertion that Joffrey, as this shaman, tells Will, "Hey, you're the knife bearer. I've come not only to tell you what your task is, but to heal you." In the book, the witch's spell to heal Will's fingers didn't actually work. Will is basically bleeding out. He is extremely wounded and not getting any better, and it's infected. And not only has the witch's spell not worked, but the special magical ointment that Giacomo Paradisi tries to give him is also not working. That ends up being like expired Neosporin. When Joffrey shows up and he has blood moss, which is this very special kind of plant that grows in Lyra's world, this is what saves Will. In addition to that blood moss aspect, Will and Joffrey don't understand who the other person is until the very last minute in the book. They have a very long conversation about the knife, what it does, about Will's task as the bearer, and how vital it is that he take the knife to Azriel's side. But he doesn't actually get to the point where he's like, "Hey, by the way, you're my son." They don't have that conversation. They don't have that reckoning in the book. So I was looking for that. I was not expecting this family reunion. That was a big difference, and I've got to say, I liked that they did have some kind of closure between them, but I'd say on the emotional impact scale, it was not as high as it could have been. After that familial connection is uncovered by Will, Joffrey goes ahead and asks Will how his mom is doing, how Will actually entered this world, whether he found a window, and Will very politely answers his questions, but Will is feeling a lot of anger, and he says, "Where were you? Mom is doing so badly without you." And Joffrey tells him that he really did try to come back, but he couldn't find a way to do so. We don't really get any indication of this in the show, but this is really the point where Joffrey breaks his promise to Lee Scoresby. Just a few minutes ago, he's promised Lee that he will make sure the knife bearer knows that it's his responsibility to look after Lyra Silvertongue. but Joffrey doesn't do that. In the book, this is really called to attention. In the show, we get absolutely nothing. It's kind of on us as the audience to remember that he made this promise. After hearing how much responsibility he has and what this task will be, Will seems very sure that he doesn't want to have anything to do with the knife, anything to do with this task that has been placed upon him. Joffrey is really insistent though, and Will finally seems to agree and says, "And then we'll go home," meaning that after all of this, after the knife has been used against the authority, they can all go home together. And Joffrey looks pretty heartbroken at this. He hangs his head for a second and then says, "And then we'll go home," and there are tears in his eyes. This is also not something that the show really delved into, but in the book, we know that Joffrey is very ill. We know that Joffrey has pretty severe heart problems, and that is kind of intrinsic to the situation Joffrey has put himself in. Big spoiler alert, just gonna put that here. If you don't want spoilers, turn off the video right now. But we know from the books that you cannot live in a world where you were not born, that it really affects you physically. And Joffrey has been on this path, has been on this crusade since he knows his time is limited. And though I'm sure he knew that death was coming for him, he also knew that he would not survive much longer anyway. We don't get any of this in the show, and I thought it really added an interesting layer to Joffrey as a character and what he views as duty and honor. Will still seems not quite convinced though, and still trying to rectify that. Joffrey says that they were both meant for this moment, that Will was meant for the knife and that Joffrey was meant to give him this task. Will makes a dig about Joffrey not being there for him as a dad, and Joffrey kind of shakes him and says, "Look at what you did without me as your father. You didn't actually need me there. You've grown into this incredible warrior." And the two of them share this really big, strong moment. Father and son have finally been reunited. They're having all of these emotions, and we hear one of the Magisterium soldiers shout, "Joffrey." Joffrey embraces Will and spins him around so that the shot that the Magisterium soldier fires hits him instead of Will. Joffrey falls to the ground. He tells Will, "Let me look at you. The night is full of angels. They will guide you now." We see Joffrey die, and his demon lasts just a little bit longer, but then fades into dust as well. Will is completely beside himself. Here he has just reunited with his father, who he's admired from afar, really wanted to be with for so long. Just after meeting him, he's been killed. The way this death happened really bothered me. It happens in such a different way in the book that I was really puzzled. In the book, Joffrey is actually murdered by a witch. She is someone who has met Joffrey before. She fell in love with him and she really wanted to live life with him, but he has told her that there's only one woman that he loves, that is his wife, and he will not love another. She has been completely obsessed and hurt by this. She's in Serafina's witch clan and has been chaperoning the kids all this time. So when she sees Joffrey, she takes her chance and she actually shoots him with an arrow. It's such a bewildering moment, and I think the power of the confusion of that was so strong for me. Will realizes that Joffrey is his dad just a moment before this witch Æsahættr actually shoots him. And when she does shoot him and his father dies, Will asks her, "What did he ever do that you needed to kill him? Tell me that if you can." The witch says, "No, I can't explain. You're too young. It wouldn't make sense to you. I loved him. That's all. That's enough." In the book, the witch then goes on to kill herself right in front of Will. And Will is completely confused and kind of repulsed by all of this. He does not understand what's going on. And I remember I was 12 when I read this, thinking, how can love mean killing someone? This doesn't make sense. I am too young to understand. But I really appreciated that Philip Pullman would include this material in a book marketed to kids, that there are things that kids don't have the emotional intelligence to understand. There are things that are beyond us, but it doesn't mean we shouldn't be exposed to them. I really love that generosity of spirit that Philip Pullman shows his audience and his readers, I should say. I think that that is something really special and really unique about him. So I really liked how complicated and weird and uncomfortable and unsatisfying the scene was in the book. The show completely skipped over this. I can see that seeing his father murdered at the hands of the magisterium would incite a motivation to avenge his father by destroying the authority, but I still think that that is not as complicated or rich or interesting as the original source material from the book. So we do see that Will takes Joffrey's jacket and puts it on. I liked this. I thought it was a very subtle hint to the idea that Will is taking up Joffrey's mantle. While Seraphina and Will happen to be away, Mrs. Coulter stumbles across a sleeping Lyra and her witch guardian. Mrs. Coulter is accompanied by the specters, and she sends one to deal with the witch. We see the specter completely devour the witch. Mrs. Coulter, meanwhile, leans over Lyra, and she looks at Lyra before stroking her hair. We see a look of sheer terror on Lyra's face as she wakes up and sees Mrs. Coulter just inches away. Seraphina has finally reached Lee's body. She sees that he has passed, and she says a spell over him. The episode ends with some pretty powerful narration that turns out to be Lord Asriel giving a speech. We don't see him immediately, though we do hear his very powerful words as we review all of the characters who've helped us get to this point. We see Will in his jacket, Seraphina, Yorick standing in front of an iceberg that is melting. We see Dr. Malone. We see Mrs. Coulter on what looks like a boat. We see Magisterium Zeppelins along with Father MacPhail. All the while, we hear about sacrifices that have been made. Lord Asriel gives a long and very moving speech. He says, "My fight is with the authority and those doling out cruelties in his name, those who seek to divide in order to control, and who have built worlds founded on privilege and divine right rather than care and need. I fight for freedom of knowledge, and in place of deceit, intolerance, and prejudice. I fight for the possibilities of understanding truths and acceptance, but I cannot win these things alone. I will need help and support. Together we can build a republic of heaven above and a republic of ideas below." And we see that Asriel is standing in a very desolate looking place that we've never seen before. He's shouting into the void. There's no one there, but he's shouting at something or someone. And he says, "Answer me, answer me." He's really desperate, but there is so much power in his words and so much conviction. He, of all people, is so confident in his mission. And very gradually they appear, angels in the sky, and two of them appear closer to him and say, "Yes, we stand with you." I really liked the scene. I love how commanding and arrogant and self-righteous Lord Asriel is. This is definitely his worst quality, but probably also his best. He believes in his own mission so much. He feels comfortable shouting at actual angels. In the very last seconds of the episode, we return to Mrs. Coulter, who is on a boat. She has a steamer trunk in front of her. She opens the trunk with so much care and love, sticks her hand in it, and we realize that inside this giant trunk are Lyra and Pan fast asleep. They're certainly not there by choice or of their own free will. She has done something to get them there, and she says to them, "You're fine now, we're out of danger. I'm taking you somewhere entirely safe." There's this really interesting dichotomy. She seems like she's very genuine. She seems like she thinks that she's doing the right thing, but locking your kid in a trunk and kidnapping them essentially, Mrs. Coulter is still up to her own hijinks. She just doesn't know how to express love in a healthy way. That really is her issue. She's probably never seen it herself, but I couldn't help but thinking like, oh, you glorious fucking nut. She has no boundaries. She has no sense of anyone else's autonomy, and God bless her. Can't wait for another season of Ruth Wilson playing Mrs. Coulter. So there we have it. By no means the worst episode, though it could have been a bit better in my opinion. I'm so looking forward to season 3. I honestly have no idea how they're going to pack all of the Emperor Spyglass into 8 episodes of a TV show. There's so much that happens in that book. Who knows what's gonna happen, but I'm sure it will be visually spectacular. Thank you so much for watching my videos. I know They can be a little bit long sometimes, and I have a lot of very strong opinions, but I really appreciate it. I really appreciate the tiny community that we have here on YouTube, and I look forward to making a few more videos about this season, certainly making videos when next season comes out. If you found my videos helpful or interesting, please feel free to subscribe and of course like them. I don't think I've actually ever said that before, but it really does make my day so much better. I really appreciate all of the comments that you guys write to me. I love the exchange of ideas that we have, and thank you for being part of my His Dark Materials life. I wish you all a very safe, wonderful, healthy, and happy new year, and I hope 2021 is so much better for all of us. Thanks again.